perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Is Point of View. And now,
Nick Fitz.
And welcome to Point of View on this Thursday, August 30th, 2018 day. Happy Toasted Marshmallow Day, more importantly. But you are stuck with me again today. So if you were listening yesterday on the Millennial Roundtable, we've extended that into today, and we've got quite a show for you today. I'm so excited to be here with you all. We're going to be talking about quite a few things here during the first hour, and then during the second hour, we've got a great show. So we'll be talking about, during the first hour, the latest on the Catholic Church. More continues to unfold relative to the Catholic Church, and so you're going to want to pay attention to that. We've got there's a phenomenal essay that was out by Damon Linker that was posted on The Week magazine's website, and it's such an excruciatingly yet moving essay that we'll just share a little bit more about, and kind of some of the implications that come from that as well. We'll be talking a little bit also about the late Senator John McCain, honored in Arizona yesterday, and just some of the tears and tributes that were kind of attributed to him, and how there continues to be more that's going to be done tomorrow as well as today as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then there's some interesting cultural research that's out that we'll be highlighting as well. Specifically, HBO's decided to kill their adult entertainment programming. We'll kind of look at the kind of porn America and just the prevalence of it, but also just the demand, where it's actually coming from. And then we'll talk a little bit about Americans are checking their email now more than ever, and just how we worship a God that in the Genesis 1 created boundaries. There was a boundary for the sun and the moon. There was a boundary for the ocean and the land, and it seems as though the boundaries of utilization of technology continue to creep a little bit further past those boundaries. And we'll talk about some of the implications in social science research out of that as well. But then during the second hour, we'll have a guest in studio with us. And so if you're watching on Facebook, thanks so much for doing that. We'll also have we'll have the book. Christopher Hutchinson will be joining us during the second hour. And if you're on Facebook, you can see the book that I'm holding up right now. He's got a new book called Rediscovering Humility. And what's fascinating is it's just a fascinating look, and very much saturated in the scriptures, about what is humility and what we can do to continue to inculcate that humility within our own temperament. And so you'll want to stick around for that as we interview him over the phone as well. And then, of course, we're going to continue. It was talked about quite extensively yesterday. And there were a couple of phone calls about this idea of evangelicals and President Trump and the cozy relationship that they have joined one with another. And we'll be taking some of your phone calls later on during the show to talk a little bit more about, is this a positive? Is this a negative? There's been some arguments that have been made back and forth. We'll highlight that, as well as open it up to you as well. But nevertheless, let's go ahead and jump into it, shall we? So if you're on the Point of View website, pointofview.net, you can jump on over there, and then I've got my daily briefing that kind of is an overview of the day's news. But specifically, the number 6 article out of there was just more breaking news out of the Catholic Church. And so, according to LifeSite, the Pope knowingly gave a Vatican apartment to a gay priest later caught in a cocaine-fueled orgy. And I apologize for this language, but it's just shocking, some of the research or some of the investigation that's coming out of this. Pope Francis, according to LifeSite, gave a Vatican apartment to a priest who was later caught hosting a drug-fueled homosexual orgy, according to LifeSite, in the same apartment, despite being warned about the priest's grave problems. A highly placed Vatican source told LifeSite News in an exclusive interview. This was the same apartment which, in the summer of 2017, complaints have been heard from neighbors, was raided by the police, the source said, in order to end the party with the significant amounts of cocaine. what we're continuing to find relative to this Catholic Church saga that just unfolds before our eyes, it's very reminiscent of what was happening specifically in Ezekiel 8, where we just are reminded that the Spirit of the Lord would give Ezekiel and move him around and give him an opportunity to be able to carve a little hole into the wall of the temple in order that he might be able to see just kind of what Ezekiel 8 says, some of the abominations that are happening. And especially if this LifeSite article is correct in its reporting, I mean, this is just unbelievable. The fallout just continues. There was a bishop, Stephen Lopez, he says that we can't believe what the cardinals and the bishops who deny the abuse. You just can't believe them, is what he's saying. And then in the Washington Post this morning, Mark Thiessen writes that the Archbishop Villagrano's letter is effectively nailed his 95 Theses to the door of St. Peter's. You'll remember Villagrano's letter that was published on Sunday. That letter was just a stinging indictment of Pope Francis, as well as just the Vatican as a whole, of not only just this allowing the perpetuation of this evil, but also the cover-up of this evil in order to be able to keep allies close as well as within the ranks and in some of the hierarchy. But perhaps the most heartbreaking article for me came according to Damon Linker out of the week. As a Catholic, he compellingly chronicled how the beauty of the church captivated him at the beginning of his faith journey years ago. Damon just wrote beautifully about how not only the architecture, but just even the glorious and the beauty of God just captivated him. And that's, as Christians, that's what we know to be true, right? Like, I mean, that he's very much echoing what David would say. And David said in Psalm 27, he said that there's one thing that I ask and that I shall seek, to be able to gaze at the beauty of the Lord all the days of my life. That was really a theological, that's theological grounding by which that's where you see so many of the beautiful cathedrals and some of the beautiful church buildings that have been characterized by the Catholic Church throughout the years. And so not only did he see the beauties of God, which we know in Psalm 50 verse 2, that the beauty of God shines forth from Zion in perfect beauty, but we also saw that emulated within the Roman cathedrals and some of these beautiful churches that just dot the landscape across the world. But so Damon Linker, like many others before him, was captivated by this and started him on this journey, and really does center his article on the beauty of the church, not only as when it originated, but also as it continued forward. But he said, as he read through quote, the toxic sludge of the grand jury report, he came to the conclusion that he can no longer face the, quote, monstrous, grotesque ugliness of that grand jury report that was earlier this month that came out of Pennsylvania that indicated that there had been upwards of 300 victims that had at least gone on record and said that they had been abused by the Catholic Church. But here's probably one of the most pressing points that he conclude in his conclusion. He says, quote, does anyone seriously believe those pews won't be far, far emptier a decade from now once the remaining parishioners absorb the reality that a church hierarchy that gets off wagging its crooked little finger at the behavior of lay Catholics behaves behind closed doors as if it considers these impossibly stringent teachings to be a colossal joke? And then he concludes by saying, I'm done. This morning, countless individuals will read not of a united church, but of a divided and hurting church. And tragically, our divisions will keep an unbelieving world from faith if you believe it to be true what Jesus said, that they will know you by your unity in John 17:21. Damon is one, and then you have Selena Zito, which is another out of the Washington Examiner, that just continue to chronicle how enough is enough, and they're leaving the Catholic Church. And I would be very interested to hear from you what your take is on what's happening relative to the Catholic Church and your experience, especially if you have a Catholic background. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And if you're on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, you, as always, can share your comment online. And what you share online, we'll try to share over air as well. And so when we come back, we're going to continue talking a little bit, especially how the press is covering this Catholic Church scandal. But we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In a recent commentary, I mentioned that many radio listeners object to the fact that Social Security is considered an entitlement. After all, they argue, they paid into Social Security and Medicare. Now they are receiving a partial refund of money they paid into the system. And while that is true for some people, it is not true for many others. Let's look at the numbers. A credible analysis was done a few years ago by the Urban Institute. Their researchers figured out what people turning 65 in various years have already paid into the system. And then they calculated what they can expect to take out after they reach age 65. And of course, the actual numbers will vary based upon family income, marital status, and longevity. In most cases, retiring Americans will receive much more from Social Security and Medicare than they put into the system. Whenever I mention this on radio, callers are shocked to hear that and often don't believe it. Here are some of the numbers from the Urban Institute. A two-earner couple receiving an average wage would have paid $722,000 into Social Security and Medicare. They could be expected to take out $966,000 in benefits. In other words, they would be paid about one-third more in benefits than they paid in taxes. A one-income earner couple earning an average wage will pay about $361,000 into Social Security and Medicare and receive about $840,000 in benefits. That's almost 2.5 times more in benefits than they paid in taxes. The conclusion is clear. In most cases, Americans who retire will receive more from Social Security and Medicare combined than they put into the system. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Thursday, August 30th, 2018 day. I keep on wanting to say Wednesday just because I'm so used to being on here Wednesdays and Thursdays. You guys are gluttons for punishment, as well as our staff is just, I don't know what they're thinking having me back on, but nevertheless, I'm so glad to be with you all. We have been talking a little bit during the first hour about the first segment, rather, about the Catholic Church and kind of some of the continual controversies that just, it really just is just ongoing. I mean, it all stemmed back from that report that happened about a month ago where the Pennsylvania grand jury report came out and indicated that there have been potentially upwards of 1,000 individuals over a 70-year period that have been victimized by these Catholic Church and these bishops, and some of the priests and the bishops, et cetera, have been involved in the cover-up of some of these sexual abuse scandals. And it's been shocking just to see some of the reaction that's come out of this. Initially, there was just the initial, I can't believe this is happening. As many of us can attest to, especially those that are professing believers, you go to church and you experience the grace of God, you see the love of God, and that love of God compels you to want to live a life that's above reproach. You're seeking to live a life that tries to please God, and this is obviously something that is not pleasing to the Lord whatsoever. I mean, you read passages like Matthew 16 about what Jesus says, don't cause any one of these little ones to stumble, or it'd be better that a millstone was tied around your neck. So there's this expectation when you go into a church that children are not only going to be welcomed, they're going to be protected, they're going to be provided for, they're going to be sustained, they're going to be nurtured, they're going to be brought up in the fear and admonition of the Lord. But what's happened is what we saw with this grand jury report of individuals that were preying on these children, and it's just inherently wrong. It's evil. Like evil. Emily Bruning of Washington Post went so far as to say that evil was walking among us. And then we're seeing some of the implications of that. Individuals that we were reading from earlier, of the so specifically Damon Linkler out of The Week that talked about how can they even think about wagging their crooked little finger at us now in order to be able to have this kind of behavior. And then you're hearing individuals like Rod Dreher over in Louisiana out of the American Conservative, and then he wrote a piece in the New York Times. Rod Dreher was at the forefront relative to journalists in the early 2000s that was investigating some of this kind of this scandal that was plaguing the Catholic Church, but he could never find individuals to kind of solidify that. There was less than 2 sources that were coming through. And so you're just seeing a lot of this burbling that's been happening underneath the surface is now just exploding, and it's worse than a volcano, and it's just hurting everyone involved in this. And so the Linkler article talked about how he was originally captivated by the beauty of the church, and now the ugliness of what this has revealed has just been so spurning to the extent that he's just walked away. And he's not the only one that's walked away. If you'll remember yesterday, instead of attending a special mass for the opening of school, 50 Washington diocese teachers boycotted in an effort to oust Cardinal Donald Wuerl. In a statement, they cited this as an act of solidarity against the injustices condoned by Cardinal Wuerl and the great hierarchy of the church. Now, if you'll remember, Cardinal Wuerl's name appeared in the Pennsylvania grand jury report, specifically, which cited cases of how he allowed abusive priests back into ministry. Wuerl was also accused over the weekend, specifically out of the Logano's letter, of knowing about the sexual misconduct of his predecessor in the Washington diocese, Theodore McCarrick, who's also known as Uncle Ted. And some of the reports that were coming out about him, not only with relative to children, but also the culture that he inculcated and fostered at some of these seminaries in the Northeast, where there was one article in particular, and I'll tweet it out. There was one article that indicated that some of these seminarians would go to bed and they would have to lock their door. They would go to great lengths to lock their doors because they didn't know who would come into their room in the middle of the night. There would be these parties that would be hosted, is what this article was indicating out of the reporting. There would be parties that were hosted that would just be blatant debauchery, and these are from the individuals that are supposed to be leading the church. They're supposed to be they're the ones that, if anything, have got to be the ones that are closest to Paul when it says in 1 Corinthians 11:1, imitate me as I imitate Christ Jesus. That they're going to be doubly judged for the teaching that they give is what we're finding. But despite all of this, what you see is reports out of Italy, citing close associates of the Pope, said he has no intention of stepping down. Ross Douthat of the New York Times agreed in his column the other morning, and he argued that he should, quote, purge, quote, the filth in the church. He went on to say, quote, that the Pope should supply Catholicism with what it's lacked these many years, a leader willing to be zealous. And we all mourn what has happened and is happening in the Catholic Church. But it's been so fascinating to watch how certain media entities have reported what's happening here. The New York Times yesterday took on a lot of flack because they reported that conservatives are, quote, pouncing on this latest scandal. Like I think we can all agree that both sides should be pouncing on this scandal. It's not a matter of trying to protect a social like a particular ideology of any sort whatsoever. Literally, we should all be vested in the fact that the next generation should not be preyed upon. They should not be abused. There was one bishop that was quoted in the article, and he said, "The Pope has a bigger agenda." And I'm literally quoting him here. He said, "The Pope has a bigger agenda. He's got to get on with other things of talking about the environment and protecting migrants and carrying on the work of the church. We're not going to go down a rabbit hole on this." What? Like, this isn't a rabbit hole. This is atrocious what's happened. When individuals, and specifically when parents can't even feel safe because they don't know how far it's gone. I think that was one of the more illuminating things. This isn't a rabbit hole, because even Selena Zito in the Washington Examiner, she did phenomenal reporting when it came to the 2016 election. She earned a name, and she's got a great new book out that details how President Trump, the factions and some of the individuals and characteristics of the voters that were voting for President Trump. It's a very fascinating book. So this premier star and a rising reporter in D.C. that is covering the president, rather. She talked about how she grew up in this Pennsylvania town, and even one of the priests that she knew at her local parish had been indicted and named in this grand jury report. That this isn't just them out there. This is us. These are individuals here in the Dallas area. There was a priest that has run off now and that ran out of country. I believe it's to the Philippines now to be able to escape some of this. This isn't just something that's happening in Boston relative to the Spotlight investigation that happened in early 2000s. This isn't just happening in Pennsylvania. This is literally happening here in the U.S. and it's close, especially for our Dallas audience, as close as right down the road. Or if you're in Pennsylvania, or I guess in Minnesota would be the other place where this is heard. Or I guess in Facebook land, it really is everywhere since there's like 2 billion people that are on Facebook right now. But nevertheless, this isn't a chasing down a rabbit hole. This is a very core of Jesus's teaching, to be able to protect the children, to be able to watch out for them and to care for them, to make sure that what Jesus would say, to train them up in the fear and admonition of the Lord. They're like a warrior, right? They're like an arrow in a warrior's quiver, that we want to shoot them in such a way that they might be directed straight to the glory of God in order that they might experience the joy that's been completed in Christ Jesus and might be for the benefit and the good of the world. Well, what's happened is these aren't arrows that are being shot. These are arrows that are being swatted down by these individuals that are preying upon them. And enough is enough. Something has to be done. And so I would be very interested to hear what you have to say. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. What you share online, we'll try to share over the air as well. But what's just so fascinating about this is that I think E.J. DeYoung captured it really well earlier on Sunday morning in the Washington Post when he says that hierarchy without transparency is tyranny. He's kind of talking about the latest claims relative to the Pope when he said that he didn't say a single word about this, but rather just asked for forgiveness at that last event in Dublin. He specifically said, quote, "We ask for forgiveness for some of the church hierarchy who did not take charge of these situations and kept quiet." He wants forgiveness, but many of us are demanding action, right? Much like we're experiencing today, God gave Ezekiel insight into the abominations taking place in the religious institutions of his day in Ezekiel 8. Ralph Waldo Emerson likened an institution to a lengthened shadow of one man. The church stands before the light of the world, loving her bridegroom, but also providing shade to a weary world. The church was never intended to add weariness, but be a place for those who are weary and heavy laden to find rest. The Pope leads the Catholic Church, but God will build his holy church and protect his little children. Make no mistake about that. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking a little bit more about the Catholic Church and just some of the repercussions that continue to come out. And as well as we'll take some of your phone calls and some of your questions. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. What you share online, we'll try to share over air. We'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, today on this August 30th, 2018 day, also known as Toasted Marshmallow Day. But nevertheless, that's probably beside the point, but hopefully in between the graham crackers. So we have been talking a little bit about the Catholic Church specifically, and we have been kind of unpacking not only the media's reaction to it, but also some of the kind of the unfolding negative characterizations and just negative news, period, that's kind of coming out of the Catholic Church. church. And so we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about something that's kind of relatively good news, but also kind of underlying it is kind of some bad assumptions, I guess you would say, just relative to the culture. So there's reports out, according to CNN, that HBO is killing its adult entertainment program. You'll notice that article that's on number 4 on the Daily Briefing. In a fascinating study, reporting, HBO, operating under new ownership, said the AT&T wasn't responsible for this decision to kind of cut adult entertainment, which had been in the works for more than a year. So they have been kind of studying the prevalence, as well as is it necessary for them to continue to produce some of these shows. I don't even know what the shows are that are kind of this adult entertainment that's happening on HBO. And what they said is, quote, in part because more explicit fare is readily available elsewhere. So according to the statement, they said over the past several years, HBO has been winding down its late night adult fare, the statement read. While we're greatly ramping up our other original programming offers, there hasn't been a strong demand for this kind of adult programming because, and here's the key part of it, because it's easily available somewhere else. And so NSYNC would sing Bye, 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 but HBO said it as well. But they're kind of revealing something pretty significant about what's happening in our culture today. We're living in a very sexually charged culture, to say the very least. Consider this. Playboy had to change their business model because we're in such a sexually charged culture today. To kind of give you that, I'm more of a numbers guy, so let's look at some of the numbers, shall we? Hollywood makes approximately 400 to 500, depending on I guess the year and who's studying it. 400 to 500 movies a year. The total adult entertainment industry produces 11,000. Okay, so 400 to 11,000. In 2016, over 4.5 billion hours were dedicated to watching these sites on the internet. Human beings have spent 1 million years watching adult entertainment since 2015. I'm going to say that one more time. Human beings have spent 1 million years, not hours, years watching adult entertainment since 2015. Every second, 28,258 users are watching this smut on the internet. Every second, 28,258 users are watching this on the internet. Oswald Chambers defines sin as legitimate desire taken to an illegitimate place, and it seems as though they're taking it there and they are staying there as well. You see, between the ages of 18 to 26, there are 87% of individuals that have been exposed to pornographic material. 40% of American adults use pornography at least once. And it's not limited to just males. 1 in 3 are women. As much as 12% of all websites contain pornography, and there are approximately 1.5 billion searches for it on the internet in the first 8 months of 2013, for example. And so, is there a tie? This is probably a significant problem. I think we can all agree. The public health concerns, I mean, it's been well documented what it does to your brain. But one of the fascinating things is what we see is that this is really a problem, but there's intimacy sought through these various communication mediums that's not real. You see, virtual reality may satisfy that temporary desire, but it doesn't gratify deep longing like an actual person. Thus, the objectification of people moves from the screen to the street. The research is very clear. Globally, 2 children are sold into slavery every minute, 1.2 million a year. There's 27 million people that are trapped in slavery here in the U.S., 43 million across the world. Average age of entry into street prostitution in America is between 12 and 14 years old. I'm going to say that again. Average age of entry into street prostitution in America is between 12 and 14 years old. It's estimated that there are 200,000 women that are forced into the sex trade every year here in the U.S., and there are 1.5 million victims of human trafficking in the U.S., a business that generates $87 million a day here in the U.S. These numbers can be overwhelming. To a certain degree, they reveal the breadth of the pervasive problem, but to a greater degree, they reveal a depth of desire here in the U.S. You see, Oswald Chambers understood that sin is a legitimate desire taken to an illegitimate place. In the human experience, there's a legitimate and good desire to be known deeply and loved wholly. After all, in the garden, God said it wasn't good for man to be alone in Genesis 2. However, the problem with pornography is that it gives the illusion of intimacy but leaves the victim alone. left to their own devices and desire and driven by desperate emotions, pornography is a drop of poisonous water for a thirsty soul. However, we need to just not only see that this is public health in and of itself, just bad, what it does to the individual person, but what we recognize that, like with any other sin, it just never stays relative. It just doesn't say private relative to that person. It continues to have implications that reach out further and further and further. But what's fascinating is what we continue to see is that there's the pornographic trend that's happening relative to individuals, because what you can also attest to, and again, pornography is not just limited. You look at the numbers of it; it's not just limited to single people. It's just pervasively stretching into every type. Every person in whatever season of life they might feel in, and what to transition this to a certain degree, you can even see this in how individuals are kind of forsaking some of those commitment intermediary institutions. I mean, that require a commitment. And what's fascinating is that these are even going down as well. So you look at the marriage numbers, for example. There's less Americans that are getting married now. The average age millennials are getting married is 31 and 29, 31 for men, 29 for women. I mean, that's within 30 years. That's an upward jump of I believe about 7 years that we're starting to see. And it's just very staggering what's happening. But we'd love to hear from you. So if you have a comment or a question, you can go to www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You can share your question or comment online, and we'll share that over the air and talk a little bit more about that. But we'll also be taking some of your phone calls as well. What do you think about some of these numbers relative? What do you think about HBO getting rid of adult programming? Obviously, that's a good thing, and so we want to encourage that, but also kind of reveal something that is very telling, even in their statement, that it's just readily available elsewhere. And so we'll be taking your phone calls about what you think about that at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. You see, we're spending, I mean, this is just one particular component, but we're just spending a significant amount of time online now. It's just, it really is. Like, I kind of get sad to realize, like, when my internet shuts down, whether it's at the office or at the house, I mean, just how much my life can shut down to a large degree, right? How many of our jobs are contingent upon what we can do at work relative with the internet, and without the internet, how much can you actually do? And it reveals another interesting study that we're going to touch on after the break that I thought was very fascinating relative to Americans are checking their email now more than ever, even at dinner. What's fascinating is what we're seeing is just this reliance upon technology that's been detrimental, obviously, is what we've seen relative to pornography and some of the utilizations of that. But there's also this beneficial component, too, that we have email. I don't remember it, but there used to be a day that you would have to send someone a letter and then wait for a significant period of time for a response back to that. I mean, we go back to the very founding of our country, and it wasn't just immediately that we figured out who the president was. You had to wait weeks upon weeks in order that all the ballots would be counted and all of the ballots would be collected, and then the tabulations could be had in order that we could find out who that person was. Whereas today, it's just immediately. Twitter has provided that immediate gratification to that. And so there's detrimental parts, obviously, to what technology has done relative to pornography, relative to various other aspects. But there's also some positive benefits through this communication medium as well. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. Specifically, we'll be looking at some of the numbers as to what technology is doing with the email, in particular, what it's doing to the human experience. About individuals, there was an article last week that we linked to in the Daily Briefing that I found so fascinating. It's the idea that even just the mere, the thinking, the perception of expectation that you're going to be checking your email at night tends to degrade on the human experience and lowers levels of happiness and satisfaction at work. Just even the mere perception of expectation, which I thought was just so fascinating, that you have to be on 24/7. And it kind of goes back to that imagery that I provide, that I think God provides in Genesis 1, of making the divisions between the sun and the moon, between the land and the water. And when the water goes over onto the land, something's not right. When we don't have those proper boundaries in place, something ends up getting flooded. And are we flooding our lives with so much of this information that's really causing the workplace to stretch outside of the work office and into the home as well? But But we got to take a break. But when we come back, we'll continue talking about this and more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. At the heart of religious liberty is the right to follow the faith of our choice. That means that no one, not even the United States Air Force, may force someone to follow any particular faith. But when Jeff Montanari converted to Orthodox Judaism, the Air Force treated him poorly. They rejected his application to be a Jewish chaplain, something the Air Force has a great need for at the present time. His superior officers were hostile towards him, excluding him from activities in order to drive him from the Air Force. He even received a litany of questions that questioned the sincerity of his conversion to Judaism. First Liberty sent a demand letter to the Air Force explaining that their job is to win wars, not question the legitimacy of someone's conversion. We believe the actions of a few Air Force officials to be unlawful discrimination. As the U.S. Supreme Court put it in Hobby v. Unemployment Appeals Commission of Florida, the First Amendment protects the free exercise rights of employees who convert from one faith to another after they are hired. In other words, religious liberty protects against discrimination even when you change your religion. Chaplain Montanari just wants to continue serving his country in accordance with his religious beliefs. We are confident that the Air Force can easily solve this problem and stand ready to assist in that process. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and we have been talking a little bit. We've been kind of all over the place, just if we're being completely honest. We were talking about during the first half hour, we were talking about the Catholic Church in particular, and then we transitioned into what HBO is doing relative to their cutting of adult programming, which is something that we can celebrate, but also undergirding at that is the reality that we just live in a very sexually charged culture in which this type of material is just pervasively available everywhere that we turn. Kind of goes back to the quote from Supreme Court Justice that he says, I don't know how to define pornography, but I know it when I see it, kind of deal. And I think many of us can relate with that about just how pervasive it is. But we're going to kind of jump a little bit over, and I've got two flash stories that I want us to kind of talk about before we make our way into the larger break, and then welcome over the phone Christopher Hutchinson that we'll be interviewing in the next hour. And he's got a new book out called Rediscovering Humility, Why the Way Up is Down. And just highly recommend this. If you're on Facebook right now, you can see this book that I'm holding up right here. It's a fascinating read. And as you can tell, I've kind of marked through it pretty significantly just because I just found myself having to rethink and consider some of these truths that he just litters all throughout his book, because it's so saturated in the scriptures. I mean, I feel like I couldn't go two sentences without seeing him reference the biblical narrative, which is always just so encouraging, because that, at the end of the day, that's the thing that never returns void or gives us and how he's perfected it. Just kidding. And then we'll also, but I wanted to talk about two stories in particular during our time that we have right now. One revolves around vacations and the other revolves around email. So since we left off the previous segment, kind of led on about the idea of email, I want to really highlight this story in particular about email. Americans check email more than ever, even at dinner, according to Pointer magazine. The study found that personal email use is up by 17% from this time last year. More than a quarter of those surveyed check their personal email from bed when they wake up, and a whopping 85% check it before getting to work. I mean, I fall within that 85%. I fall within this. I fall within the quarter that check their email before the email when they wake up in the morning. I'm that guy. I'm also that guy that hopefully can send you an email before you wake up in the morning with the daily briefing. But nevertheless, more numbers that I think kind of gives us a better picture of what's happening here. 60% of those surveyed check personal email when watching TV. Here, 40% admitted to reading emails in the bathroom, and 27% are total anti-socialites and glance at email while in mid-meal with others. That's a fascinating study, because what we know about the research is that individuals that are on their phone, it doesn't even have to be checking email, individuals that are on their phone, according to studies, have indicated that hinders connection and hampers conversation between these individuals. And I think we can all attest to that, right? We've all been out to dinner, we've all had it, or unless you're just a killer conversationalist, like we've all seen a cell phone that's been on a table, and how quickly do we just the connection get hindered because we see that cell phone, and maybe that person's no longer looking at us, but they're looking at the phone. And so what they found is the study is not only does it hinder connection, but also hampers conversation that could potentially be happening with you and the people that are at the table with you. But also one of the fascinating things is what another study indicated, I think this was out of Drexel University, that talked about how even the presence of a cell phone lowers your cognitive skills and abilities. And for those of you that are listening right now, you can probably think through some of these instances where you are trying to type up this email, you're trying to do some significant work on your computer, and you keep on getting the sideways glance to check your phone to see if it's wrong or if there's somebody that had sent you a text message. It keeps you from kind of getting that running head start, keeps you going in order that you can think deeply about particular topics. Cell phones have even done that. But nevertheless, let's get back to emails, for example. So I always think through, so whenever I think about checking email, my mind always goes to just the email that obviously I send every morning. It's called the Daily Briefing. Research shows that it increases your level of happiness and awareness of current events. Those who have read it showed higher levels of patience, too, most likely putting up with me and my corny jokes. Nevertheless, but in all seriousness, the average office worker receives 121 emails a day and sends approximately 40 business emails daily. On average, it takes only 6 seconds to check a typical email after it arrives in the inbox. Yet email consumes 24% of some individuals' days, according to a study that was published in Forbes magazine. Earlier this week, Adobe released a study of the 9 most annoying phrases to put in an email, which I thought was with some of those phrases were pretty telling. Personally, I think for me, the most annoying phrase for me is the one with the typo in it. But interestingly enough, one study found that if an email has typos, but it has at the bottom of it, sent from my iPhone, recipients did not judge that person as harshly. Just the expectation that you're going to obviously have typos when you're typing out on your phone. But nevertheless, make no mistake about it, many of us have become addicted to our phones, as the study indicates. In his book, Irresistible, Adam Alter likens mobile technology to the body falling in unrequited love with a dangerous drug. So there's that study, but then there's also just another fascinating study that I think would be very interesting for us to think through is the idea, according to CNBC article, that taking vacations can prolong your life. That's the finding of a 40-year study presented at the ESC conference and accepted for publication in the Journal of Nutrition, Health, and Aging. Shorter vacations were associated with excessive deaths in the intervention group. In the intervention group, men who took 3 weeks or less of annual vacation had a 37% greater chance of dying in 1974 to 2004 than those who took more than 3 weeks. Vacation time had no impact on risk of death in the control group. The conclusion of the articles indicated that our results do not indicate that health education is harmful. Rather, they suggest that stress reduction is an essential part of programs aimed at reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease. When a country boy can survive, but only if he takes a vacation down to the Chattahoochee. One might say, obviously, I'm Rocky Top biased, but these numbers are not. 41% of Americans did not take a single vacation day in 2015. 55% of Americans didn't use all their vacation days in 2015, myself included in that number. Research indicates that working overtime reduces your productivity and makes you feel less healthy and be less healthy. For example, if you stay up 17 hours straight, your physical performance would be worse than if you had drank over the legal limit of alcohol. So if you're staying up for longer than 17 hours, you're operating as if you have drank over the legal limit of alcohol. In his book, The Rest of God, Mark Buchanan observes that there's a part of God we can know only through stillness, reminding us of that great psalm in Psalm 46:10, to be still and know that I'm God. He concludes, unless and until we rest in God, we will never risk for God. So he likens the ability to rest in God and rest in his promises and assurances with the capacity for us to be able to risk for him. Wayne Mueller, in his book Sabbath, argues that the busyness of the world can cause us to get lost in that world. His solution, with a phrasing that only Mueller could do, like a path through the forest, Sabbath creates a marker for ourselves, so if we're lost, we can find our way back to the center. You see, rest isn't a sign of laziness, but rather is an external reminder of God's faithfulness. And so we'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. We're going to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but also we're going to be welcoming over the phone Christopher Hutchinson, who's got a new book out called Rediscovering Humility. You can check out that book on our website, pointofview.net. You can click on his picture, and then you can find out ways that you might be able to secure that book, buy that book on this little website called Amazon. But when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more to Christopher Hutchinson about his book, Rediscovering Humility, Why the Way Up is Down. But also, you can check out our Facebook website, www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Unfortunately, you have to see my picture, but you also, fortunately, have a chance to be able to submit your question. So you can submit your question underneath the live video box, and what you submit over online, you will share over air. But we'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Thursday, August 30th, 2018 day. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, filling in for Kirby Anderson. So I apologize that you don't get Kirby, but good news. No, I don't know if it's necessarily good news, but nevertheless, we have been talking about during the first hour. We've had quite a show for you. We were talking a little bit about the uncovering of kind of some more of the controversy that's coming out of the Catholic Church, in particular what LifeSite News was reporting about, just some of the cover-up, as well as just some of the sweetheart deals that the Pope was giving to certain particular cardinals, even after they had been caught. We were talking a little bit about that and the implications of that, specifically how there were a couple of individuals, Damon Linker out of The Week, as well as Selena Zito out of Washington Examiner, had said enough is enough, and they're following the path that Rod Dreher over at the American Conservative took in particular. And then, so we talked a little bit about some of the implications that were happening there, as well as the media coverage of the Catholic Church scandal. And then we transitioned to talk a little bit about what email is doing to us, in particular, what the human experience, how it's being changed by technology, about everything from HBO and some of what they're doing, as well as what's happening relative to email and how pervasive email is becoming and how much of a large part of our life it's taking on. But we're going to transition and switch gears for this next hour, because we have got a special guest that's going to be joining us over the phone, Christopher Hutchinson, who just wrote a book called Rediscovering Humility: Why the Way Up is the Way Down. Christopher, so great to have you on.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
We are so grateful. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Oh, goodness.
Where to begin?
Humility, and you're going to start with me talking about myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. I'm just kind of regular American had a good upbringing with wonderful parents. They came to Christ when I was about 10, and we were in a mainline church at that time. And then I came to Christ when I was 17, largely around the theme of this book. I thought I was a pretty righteous guy, and that the gospel was for sinners outside of the church. And then the Holy Spirit convicted me, showed me I was the sinner, that Jesus had died for me, and that just changed everything. So I went from a life of trying to earn God's favor to a life of grace. And then, so that led to just trying to pursue humility as the main Christian goal. Went to college, met my wonderful wife there. The Army paid for college, so I spent 3 years in the Army paying them back, and then some. Then thought maybe God called us to the ministry, so went off to seminary, tested our gifts, had the church look at me and approve, and so it wasn't just my decision. That's part of the theme, that submit to the judgment of others, and been in ministry since.
That's phenomenal. And now you find yourself as the senior pastor of Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church in Blacksburg, Virginia. So I think would it be correct in assuming that you're a Hokie?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And my oldest daughter is a graduate, so we're very much Hokies here.
Okay. So it's the kickoff of football season, so feeling pretty good about it?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't followed it so closely this year. I'm actually more of a soccer fan.
Oh, really? Okay.
A friend of mine. So, but yeah, I'll definitely follow football, basketball, soccer, the main sports.
Well, that's great. That's great. So, your senior pastor, Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church, wrote just a new book that's out called Rediscovering Humility: Why the Way Up is the Way Down. So tell us, what made you write this book?
Yeah, well, like I said, I soon saw that humility had to be at the center of the Christian life, and that was reinforced by my reading C.S. Lewis pretty early on, It's just almost on every page of his novels and books. And then in college, I read some theology by a guy named Jonathan Edwards, an early American theologian. And again, just the logic of humility is at the center of his thinking. And then even as I was, realizing this, I became part of the evangelical subculture, and I realized that a lot of times we don't emphasize it. We're much more into growing and power and winning and outward appearances, and really miss, I think, a central part of the gospel's work in our lives.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I really picked up on. I mean, you even say it within your preface. You say, quote, "I want humility to show itself in all its truth, beauty, and goodness, something to be pursued, even if never fully found before heaven." I mean, it really is. I think there's like a characterization now within the American experiment, especially within the church, is just this idea that humility isn't necessarily something that would be beneficial. It's not advantageous, especially within the business culture or within any culture, rather, in this dog eat dog, pull yourself up by your bootstraps world, right?
Right. Yeah, I think so. And frankly, there's truth to that. I mean, Jesus talks about people that are worldly wise, that they live for their priorities in Luke 16 and are smarter about it than Christians.
Yeah.
But his point there, and I don't even talk about this in the book, but his point in Luke 16 is that Christians live for heaven. We have the gospel. We know we're going to live forever, and so therefore that lets us put it out all on the table for others. So we don't do dog eat dog. We know we're already saved, and so therefore we can just pour out our life to others.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a really great point, just even that little idea. Like, we have been saved, but humility is one of those elusive qualities, right? Like, you never become humble. It's like the pursuit of trying to become more humble, right? And so help unpack that idea a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's great. And in the second chapter, I say, look, if you pursue humility as your main goal, you're not going to make it.
Yeah. That in and of itself is not humble.
Right. Yeah, you become proud of your humility, and I've been there a lot, frankly. Just being too self-conscious about it. But if you pursue Christ and you want more of Christ, if, like John the Baptist, if we decrease and he increases, then you'll get Jesus and humility to boot.
Yeah.
And so you put your focus on him and serving him, and you will become more like him because he's living in you.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things, because you even lead off chapter 2 in this, and what I found is so interesting, and I'll quote your words, because your words are much better than what I would be able to say. In other words, a venture into humility is much more like a good old-fashioned wrestling match than a peaceful walk in the woods. Like, you get this idea of humility just being this nice, just meager, like, little thing, but the reality is, like, the pursuit after humility is something that you have to fight continually, and also often viciously, because at the end of the day, you're crucifying some of those desires, right?
That's it. I mean, you said it very well, actually. Yeah, it's a fight against our pride and our sin, and it's not always fun. It ends up in a lovely place, because that's the promise, which is the heart of the book, where Jesus says 3 times, everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. So there's the warning. But then he says everyone who humbles themselves will be exalted. And so as you fight that good fight, it brings a joy that's deeper than just winning in an earthly way. You become more like Christ. That brings a deeper joy, and you do end up in a good place. But yeah, it's hard to get there.
Yeah. So this is Christopher Hutchinson joining us over the phone. He's the senior pastor at Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church in Blacksburg, Virginia. He just wrote a book called Rediscovering Humility, Why the Way Up is the Way Down. And I've got it right here on, if you're watching us on Facebook, I'm going to put it over my face so you don't have to see me, but rather you can see it. But we're going to have to take a break. But when we come back from break, we're going to continue talking about this book. Specifically, I want to talk with Christopher a little bit more about chapter 2. I thought was very fascinating. He gave some warnings about the false deceptions in the pursuit of humility that I think would be very advantageous for us to kind of spell out a little bit, as well as we'll kind of go through the entire book during the hour that we have together. And so, but we are also allowing you to be able to join in on the conversation. You can call in at 800-351-1212 or on Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In a recent commentary, I mentioned that many radio listeners object to the fact that Social Security is considered an entitlement. After all, they argue, they paid into Social Security and Medicare. Now they are receiving a partial refund of money they paid into the system. And while that is true for some people, it is not true for many others. Let's look at the numbers. A credible analysis was done a few years ago by the Urban Institute. Their researchers figured out what people turning 65 in various years have already paid into the system. And then they calculated what they can expect to take out after they reach age 65. And of course, the actual numbers will vary based upon family income, marital status, and longevity. In most cases, retiring Americans will receive much more from Social Security and Medicare than they put into the system. Whenever I mention this on radio, callers are shocked to hear that and often don't believe it. Here are some of the numbers from the Urban Institute. A two-earner couple receiving an average wage would have paid $722,000 into Social Security and Medicare. They could be expected to take out $966,000 in benefits. In other words, they would be paid about one-third more in benefits than they paid in taxes. A one-income earner couple earning an average wage will pay about $361,000 into Social Security and Medicare and receive about $840,000 in benefits. That's almost 2.5 times more in benefits than they paid in taxes. The conclusion is clear. In most cases, Americans who retire will receive more from Social Security and Medicare combined than they put into the system. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined over the phone today by Christopher Hutchinson. He's got this new book out called Rediscovering Humility. And so we've been talking a little bit about this, but one of the things that I want to do is I want to commend our listeners, to be able to jump over to the Point of View website at www.pointofview.net. You can click on Christopher's picture, and when you click there, you'll hopefully be able to find a link that gets you to his book. And specifically, you need to go buy his book. Why do you need to go buy his book? One, it's a very thoughtful treatment on the subject of humility. And I think he argues very persuasively about the centrality and the significance of humility, especially in 2018. But two, Christopher, I just want to commend you here over the air. I don't think I could go 2 sentences without seeing a scriptural reference. Like it's just littered and permeated with scripture. It's just been it was so helpful going through it.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, I'm glad. Just that's what was on my heart as I was talking about this. Just all those passages just came to mind, particularly the Gospels, of course, and then the epistles, because the New Testament is a reflection of, obviously, the Christian life. So.
Yeah, that's just great. So, like, one of the things that I wanted to pick up on what we're talking about during the first segment specifically is what you say are the 4 warnings that need to be avoided in the pursuit of true humility. And so, just for our listeners, we'll start off just by naming them all. So, 1, not by human effort; 2, not by demeanor or speech alone; 3, an inconsistent humility; but 4, not self-deprecation. I think the 4th one probably is most significant, at least maybe that's just a revelation in my own personal life. But let's walk through all 4 of these in particular. And so there's the first one. It says not by human effort. Help us understand that.
Yeah, if I read this book or read the scriptures and said, all right, I'm just going to become humble tomorrow, I'm just going to make myself be humble, I think that would largely be a fleshly effort, which Paul warns against in Colossians 2. And rather than a patient relying upon the Holy Spirit to work it in me as I reflect upon the gospel and pray and just humble myself before God. So it's not an easy thing to attain. So you have to let God do it in you more.
It very much is like it's like literally counter. It's not just countercultural. It's just counter to our human nature, right? Like we love others the way that we love ourselves. It's the built-in assumption that we love ourselves, and a part of loving yourself is making much of yourself.
That's right.
So there's just it doesn't take time. It's just it's a very much a slow, arduous process. It's not the walk in the woods that you talk about.
That's right. And remembering that Jesus is on your side, fighting for you, riding forth victoriously for the cause of meekness, as Psalm 45 says. So you're going to win this battle, especially when you finally lay down your body in the end and God takes you home to glory. So, but it's not by your effort. And the next one is just we sometimes fall into humility as just thinking it's someone's personality, or they say, "Oh, shucks" a lot and that kind of thing. And again, it's just there's some people that have kind of a gruff external personality. That's just who they are. But deep down, they're about serving God and others. And so you want to be careful not to judge externally.
Yeah, I was thinking about that just because I think you summarized it so well, which is that little cultural reference, the "aw shucks," the "leave it to Beaver," this Andy Griffith kind of thing, where it's just simply your words. The words reveal the heart, but sometimes the actions have to correspond with the words, and the actions might not be there relative to a humble spirit. Yeah,
that's right. And then that leads to the third one, which is we're just inconsistent. For instance, I'm pretty good at not boasting about myself for the most part. I'm very wary of being vainglorious. But I take pride in some other parts of being knowledgeable about certain things. I want to put little hints into the conversation that I know a lot about something. So just being aware of your own inconsistency helps you to be patient towards others that are prideful in some areas and humble in others.
And I think that reveals like a built-in thing too, because I think it's pretty clear the numbers indicate that no man is an island, and this is not a lonely journey to humility. And I think a part of that too, right, is being in community, to have individuals, not just you policing yourself, because we all have our blind spots, but being in community that allows individuals to be able to speak those words. So that when we're praying for humility, it often will come from the rebuke or the encouragement of another.
That's right, and that jumps to the last half of the book, the second half, which talks about humility in the church. It has to be in community, and it has to be under, in my opinion, formal membership with accountability and discipline. And the book of Proverbs talks a lot about this.
Yeah, we're gonna go ahead.
No, better a rebuke than flattery.
Oh, that's faithful are the wounds of a friend. We'll talk about, especially during 2016 for the presidential election. I mean, even just now, for example, but we won't get into that right now in particular. So let's go. The fourth one would be not self-deprecation, which I think is probably the most prevalent when individuals think about humility. It's this idea that it's not so much they're thinking less of them; they're just thinking less of themselves, right? Not necessarily thinking more of others.
That's right. Yeah, and C.S. Lewis is very good on this. A guy named Tim Keller is very good on this. It's not beating yourself up. We already know we're sinners. That's why we need the gospel. That's why Jesus died for us. And so being self-aware, judging yourself of where you fall short, but then just, again, turning your eyes to the glories of the gospel, Christ at work in you and those around you. And so, as C.S. Lewis describes, a truly humble person isn't talking about themselves and how humble they are. They're asking questions about you.
Yeah, and I think to love your neighbor as yourself is one of the primary ways, or I guess Les Mis, you would say, to love is to see the face of God, right? And so you kind of you move into the third chapter and you talk about making Christ central, and you give the great Robert Murray quote: "For every look at yourself, take 10 looks at Christ." And you say one of the dangers of this book is that readers will focus on becoming more humble and forget about the one who can make them so. I can almost hear you just echoing what Paul says in Galatians 3:2 of just this idea of setting your sight on things above and not of this world, right? And the things of this world being the mirror, that you're just constantly gazing into yourself to try to find the humility, when really the humility is just looking up to him.
That's right. Yeah. I can't add anything to that.
So tell us a little bit more. I was really fascinated by this theology of the gap that you were talking about, making its way through. You said the greater the gap between God and people, the greater the need for God's grace to effect a reconciliation. Spell that out a little bit for us.
Yeah. So we Christians all understand the gospel that Jesus died for us, but some churches and theologies just say we're a little bit sinful, we just need a little bit of help, and Jesus is there to help us get through life. I actually heard a preacher say that once. He said, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God a little bit, and so we all need a little bit of grace. And I just said, oh, that's not the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the more we see how huge the gap is between us and God's holiness, Isaiah 6, he's holy, 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 and we are not. Then the more we realize that when we are saved, it's entirely by grace through faith alone. And that just humbles us.
Yeah. It's kind of like I was mindful of from, I think it's Genesis 19 or 17, where it's like, where you see Moses, or not Moses rather, but you see Abraham say like, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. It's the idea like, oh God, why don't you just sprinkle a little bit of blessing onto my life, when in reality God's wanting to create a new life in us, like wholly not contingent upon ourselves or on our own actions, but really God wants to do something much different than what we have in mind. And so it's not just, I don't just need a little bit of grace sprinkled on me. I need grace to be able to allow me to stand, because apart from grace, I am nothing, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's the essence of the scriptures in the book. And as Isaiah 57 says, God dwells in two places, a high and holy place, but also with those that are lowly and contrite in heart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we want to be.
Yeah, and you talk about this a little bit, because a part of this American, I would just say a part of the American experiment is almost like the self-reliance, that we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And you talk about that a little bit in your section, Humility Maintains a Healthy Distrust in Oneself. So tell us a little bit about what you were talking about relative to kind of the self-reliance.
Yeah, so that's part of the chapter on humility and truth. And I wrote that largely because we live in a relativist culture, which says, and I'm thinking about the university setting in particular, which says humility means never embracing truth. And that's not the Christian perspective. The Christian perspective says, if God has said something, humility embraces that. Once you become convinced something is true, then the humble thing is to embrace it. And so that begins with distrusting your own judgment, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a good scientist is like that. They want to base their final conclusions on the results of the experiment, not what they think might happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so with religion, we must submit ourselves to truth revealed in God's word, not our own hearts.
Yeah, I was just reminded me of my PhD dissertation committee. One of the individuals was my reviewer, and what I always said is he haunted me. Like, because one of the ways that he haunted me was I can't project my own data onto the set. Like, I've got to allow the data to speak for itself. We need to allow the biblical narrative to speak for itself. But nevertheless, we've got to take one of those breaks. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking with author Christopher Hutchinson, who's also the senior pastor of Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church in Blacksburg, Virginia. I want to commend you to go onto the Point of View website, pointofview.net. Click on Christopher's face, and you're going to be able to find the opportunity to go buy his book, Rediscovering Humility. But we got to take a break. But when we come back, more with Christopher.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this August 30th, 2018 day, we have over the phone with us Christopher Hutchinson, who's the author of the new book, Rediscovering Humility, Why the Way Up is the Way Down. I don't know if it's supposed to be communicated like that, but I feel really good about it, though. Christopher is the senior pastor of Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church in Blacksburg, Virginia. He's been talking to us a little bit about the book, and so we're going to be opening up the phone lines. If anyone's interested in asking a question or offering your point of view on Christopher's book, you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, we've got Christopher Hutchinson on the line with us for the next 30 minutes. We'd love for you to be able to talk to him. Again, 800-351-1212, or jump over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, where you can find out more information on Christopher, as well as ask a question of him on the comments section and what you share online. We've got time, and we'll share it over air as well. So, Christopher, let's pick back up in your book. And so I'm looking there. We'll hit straight at it right now, just because you bring up this really interesting point. And you talk about in one book, one chapter, you said, today's culture shutters away suffering as best it can. For many reasons, we keep death distant and sanitized. And you talk about how suffering refines faith and reiterates that the Christian's true inheritance is kept in heaven. Help us to unpack that a little bit for us. Do you have just a cultural thought maybe about that, or just what have you?
Yeah. I guess I'll just start with the New Testament, that as Paul and Peter and the others unpack what does it mean to follow Christ in this world, I think they very clearly say it looks like Jesus in his first coming as a servant, not his second coming with glory. And, of course, we tend towards the glory parts, the success. And in our American culture, because we've been such a successful country, but also that was evident in the New Testament as well. In the book of Corinthians, the Corinthian church was very proud and outwardly successful. And so Paul reminds them through two long letters that weakness is the way, as J.I. Packer puts it. And so suffering for the Christian is not fun, but it's something that is to be embraced because it produces in us character, and character produces hope, Romans 5. It makes us more useful for God's kingdom because it allows us to empathize with others that are weak and struggling and need the gospel, so that we're not just walking around as these victorious conquerors, but we are able to empathize with those that are also hurting and need Christ.
Mm. Yeah, I just think about it like I was trying to rack my brain when I was reading it. Like I think that line about death being sanitized and distant, like I couldn't help but think, I mean, there used to be a day that, and we still see it in so many towns. I'm almost for sure there's one in Blacksburg. There used to be a day that the graveyard was in the center of the town. Yep. And gradually over the years, we just kind of relegated it to the outskirts of the town, because again, it's that idea that we just don't want, we don't want to be reminded of death, right? We don't want to be reminded of our frailty. If anything, what we're seeing today is the exact opposite, like all the wellness and the lifestyle brands of just trying to elongate our life, to do everything that we can to get the most out of life, which in and of itself isn't bad. But when we're not reminded of death, it's almost like we can just take for granted the fact that every day is a gift, right?
That's right. And that's why I quote some of the older hymns in that chapter on suffering, which is called Seeking the City Which Is to Come. Because the older Christians, they didn't put death away in nursing homes and so forth. It was there in their living room and in their bedrooms. And so they sang about death a lot more than our contemporary worship songs. And that means they know they needed a Savior. They know that means death is the great humbler. Mm-hmm. We're all, whether successful or not successful, whether wealthy or poor, we all have to face it. And that's a great reminder. And for the Christian, it's not something to be scared of. As Paul says, to live is Christ, but to die is gain. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm glad you brought up the graveyards just quickly, because I've fought for years to put a graveyard in our churchyard, mm-hmm. so that we would be reminded as we come in worship. This is where we're headed, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, and obviously it just helped me understand, because even when you're thinking about that, I think one of the beautiful things that you just said is the idea that we're welcoming death into our homes, and it's kind of, it just gives me the illusion that, and again, I don't want to attack the idea of like nursing homes, because I think there's some really good things that come from it, but we're increasingly trying to move like an older generation just away. Like there's just a value to be had in not being so segregated among the ages. Now there's a lot of benefits. Obviously, you're wanting to create less barriers so that individuals can experience and know the gospel of Jesus Christ. Especially maybe in nursing homes, there's just an older generation is just there's just a prevalence of needs that can be attended to at a nursing home. So I'm not saying those in and of themselves are bad. I'm just saying we're missing out, I would offer, when we're so segregated within our ages at church, in school, at work, etc., even in our grocery stores, for goodness sake.
Well, let me put it this way. I think you're right. They serve a great need, and so I'm not criticizing anyone that uses them. But one of the great benefits I had was to have my grandfather live with us in his last years. And in fact, we named our oldest daughter after him. And just, again, being around it, and the scriptures point us to the wisdom of the aged. And so in our churches, at least, we can encourage that intergenerational time. My favorite thing to do as a pastor is to mess around, to pastor the kids in our church, because they're just fun.
Yeah.
And they're goofy and they don't have agendas. But also to go to the nursing homes and just sit and be encouraged by these brothers and sisters that have been through so much, and they're so cheerful still, and I hope I have half of their godliness when I'm their age.
That is so true. And so we're going to jump over to a phone call. So we've got Derek from Georgia right now that's on the line. Derek, are you there?
Yes, sir. How are y'all doing today?
Doing well, Derek.
Well, thank you.
What's your point of view?
I appreciate listening to you. I just tuned in, and I can hear the humility just in Christopher's voice. I'm a new time listener, and I had a question. It almost relates to what I just said there, because I was wondering, Chris, in particular, how you deal with because it's such a fine line to stay humble and without letting pride seep in, and to have people admonish you for your humility. For the fellow Christians admonish you, it's, or worldly people admonish you for, your humility. And how do you deal with that fine line of, because, I think all of us as humans, we still kind of, deep down, even though we don't like to take credit for it, but we deep down, we feel that little seed of pride want to want to seep in. And how do you is that just something that's just a struggle that we'll have to deal with, or what do you do?
Yeah.
'Cause I think we all, if we're honest with ourselves, it's really hard to keep from getting prideful, amongst, within ourselves. So
right.
I appreciate if you can answer that.
Yeah, well, I hope I can. I think you're on the right track, which is to be self-aware that the devil will sneak in subtle ways, and so you put on the armor of Christ. You're aware that pride will creep in as soon as somebody compliments you, so you immediately give the glory to God. Any good thing we have is from God as a gift. So you recognize that. And sometimes, you don't have to give someone a speech. If they tell me good sermon, the best thing for me to say is thank you, or I'm glad it encouraged you. I don't need to say, I don't have to pretend to be all super spiritual and say glory to God, glory to God.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just say thank you, but you realize down deep it's from God. And when you're in the world, if any worldling admonishes you for being humble, just let that roll off your back like water off a duck, because they don't get it. I was in the Army for a few years, and there's some great parts of the Army that really emphasize service over self. So as a Christian, you would emphasize those good parts of the military, the secular world, service, rather than promoting yourself and getting the most medals you can.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really great point, especially as a millennial. It's like the idea sometimes we just over spiritualize it, especially whether it's like so. You hear someone has given you a compliment, and it's like, well, I can't accept that whatsoever. All glory to God because He has given me every good and perfect thing that's come from heaven for the benefit of the world, the extension of His kingdom, the joy of my soul. And just not being able just to accept the compliment and allow your heart to be able to do the necessary work to keep it from rooting in and pride multiplying. But nevertheless, we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking with Christopher about his new book, Rediscovering Humility. I am really interested. When we come back, we're going to talk about the role of the church in humility, in inculcating humility, but also, too, especially for some of our listeners that are more ambitious, especially myself, what role does humility play relative to ambition and the holy discontent individuals have? We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. At the heart of religious liberty is the right to follow the faith of our choice. That means that no one, not even the United States Air Force, may force someone to follow any particular faith. But when Jeff Montanari converted to Orthodox Judaism, the Air Force treated him poorly. They rejected his application to be a Jewish chaplain, something the Air Force has a great need for at the present time. His superior officers were hostile towards him, excluding him from activities in order to drive him from the Air Force. He even received a litany of questions that questioned the sincerity of his conversion to Judaism. First Liberty sent a demand letter to the Air Force explaining that their job is to win wars, not question the legitimacy of someone's conversion. We believe the actions of a few Air Force officials to be unlawful discrimination. As the U.S. Supreme Court put it in Hobby v. Unemployment Appeals Commission of Florida, the First Amendment protects the free exercise rights of employees who convert from one faith to another after they are hired. In other words, religious liberty protects against discrimination even when you change your religion. Chaplain Montanari just wants to continue serving his country in accordance with his religious beliefs. We are confident that the Air Force can easily solve this problem and stand ready to assist in that process. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined today by Christopher Hutchinson during this last segment on Rediscovering Humility, Why the Way Up is the Way Down, the author of this new book on trying to figure out humility. But specifically, Christopher, I want us to talk a little bit towards the latter end of the book. You talk about the role of the church in that. So share that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, so one of the reasons I wrote this book is there are some other excellent books on humility out there. I always point people to Andrew Murray's book, which is about 100 years old. But none that I've read talk about humility in the church as the church. Mm-hmm. And so part of this book is not just saying how does the church help us in humility, which of course it does, but how can local congregations put humility at the center of their life as they preach the gospel, as they try to grow, as they try to conduct ministry. And so I try to think that through. And again, it's hard because if you talk about it all the time, then you just become insufferable. But I think in today's American culture, particularly the evangelical church, we just don't think about it enough. And so we promote certain men or women as great leaders. We brand our own churches. And I think if we were to be more self-conscious about humility as central, then it would be reflected in the way we conduct our churches.
I think one of the interesting things that you bring out in the book is the role of prayer when it comes to humility. Share a little bit about that.
Well, sure. So a church that prays a lot knows they need God a lot.
Yeah.
But a church that's got it figured out, they've got the programs, they've got the manuals, they've bought it, they have all the conferences lined up. There's a certain worldly way that's going to make a church grow just by following a business model, really, I think. And then you don't need to pray very much, honestly. But if you're kind of a messed up church like ours is, and you just do a simple thing, all you do is you preach and you try to be kind to people, it's not going to work or grow unless you're praying and asking God to bless it.
Yeah. Okay, so help me, a personal question that I had coming into this is the role of ambition relative to humility, right? So I would imagine a lot of our listeners are out there, there are some out there that are very ambitious by nature. The idea of humility seems to strike against ambition to a certain degree. So how would you say those two relate? For the individual there's a holy discontent, as Bill Hybels would say, that desires to kind of effectively deploy their gifts in such a way that hopefully can be for the kingdom of God, not for their own kingdom. But what does a holy ambition look like for a humble spirit?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess my book provides a little bit of a critique towards that, honestly.
Yeah.
And so that's why I go to Luke 14, because one of the times where Jesus says, if you humble yourself, you'll be exalted, and vice versa, the context is a wedding. Well, it's not a wedding feast. It's a meal, though, in the Pharisee's home. And he says, when you are invited to a wedding, do not invite yourself up to the head table, but wait for someone else to invite you. And that's also in the book of Proverbs. So I think that applies to our careers. I don't think it just applies to wedding feasts, obviously, that there's a sense where we trust God that if he's going to use us, then he will promote us in time. And so I think C.S. Lewis, in his essay, The Inner Ring, if you've ever read that, is an excellent description of that our main job is to do our work excellently for the sake of our customers. And when you do that, the people that matter will notice. And if we end up in a small place, as the hymn puts it, I'm content to be in a corner if that glorifies God. So if our ambition, if our holy ambition, if it's really holy, then we just want to go where God sends us, even if this world doesn't notice. And in heaven, all that's going to get fixed, and that's the next part of Luke 14. He says, when you throw a feast, throw it for people who cannot pay you back, so that you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous.
Yeah, I think the ambitious person that's trying to be humble or trying to pursue after humility, I think it's the changing of the reality. Like the end goal isn't necessarily the results. The end goal would be the process. So you're wanting to do your work excellently. And so from a God perspective, we're just trying to sow the seeds that he's given to us, but then and trust the results to him. But be content in the process and not necessarily just find your contentment at the end goal of the process, because at the end of the day, it's the Lord that rolls the dice and it's every decision comes from him, right?
That's right. And the book of Ecclesiastes is excellent upon that topic, really, that we should just enjoy the work God gives us and leave the results to him.
Yeah. And so, Christopher, so what was it? What was one of those things that you found out that you discovered in writing this book? Was there something that surprised you? Was there something that you found out about yourself in this book, in the writing of the book? Because I know just writing in particular, as Francis Bacon said, it produces an exact man. And so what was something that you found in this book?
Oh, well, well, just to get a little personal, I mean, it had been on my heart for 20, 30 years.
Wow.
And then the church gave me a sabbatical, which I really appreciated. And what surprised me is that it just kind of came out. I mean, people say that, but I'm not the most disciplined person in the world. Just ask my wife. But I just got up every morning, went to a coffee shop or sometimes to a local farm, and it was just a joy. And so that surprised me, actually, that I got it done. Honestly, that really surprised me. I really was like, gosh, I got it done. And then the other thing, and I haven't really talked about this too much other than in the appendix of the book, is as the publishing process started and certain friends of mine that were fairly prominent in my world were endorsing it and so forth, I faced a number of personal trials which have almost taken me out of the ministry with my own health, honestly, both with stress, and I contracted Lyme disease as well. So none of that is all that surprising, really. Mm-hmm. I wrote a book on humility, and God's going to say, all right, we're going to let you have a little bit more, whether you want it or not.
Yeah. Wow.
So I always tell people my next book's going to be on prosperity.
That's great. That's so great. So our last word to the listeners that are listening right now, what would be the word that you would commend to them? Why should they pick up this book, Rediscovering Humility, outside of just what is just obviously, I believe, an excellent treatment of the Scriptures?
Well, first let me give a practical thing. They might want to go to the publisher, New Growth Press, instead of Amazon, because it's a little cheaper there.
Okay.
And I just appreciate New Growth Press's taking a risk on me. Why should they? Well, I think you said it in the very beginning. There's just a lot of Scripture here. And I talk a lot about Jesus. And if you want to know the Bible more, you want to know Jesus more, and you want his help in really thinking this through in your life. And if you're a church leader of any kind, I think, again, I don't know of any other resource out there that explicitly says, here's some humble ways to do church, at least in a book treatment. So those would be a couple plugs for it.
That's phenomenal. Well, Christopher, thank you so much for joining us. And again, Christopher Hutchinson, author of the new book, Rediscovering Humility, While the Way Up is Down. And you can pick that up at newgrowthpress.org, or you can go to our website, pointofview.net. When you go to pointofview.net, you can click on Christopher's picture, and there'll be more information about his book, as well as more information to find out more about his church and some other material. Pastor of this Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church in Blacksburg, Virginia. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us. But when we come back, we're going to have to take a commercial break right now. When we come back from break, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the headlines that's making news today. Specifically, we're continuing to hear more and more about this evangelical meeting that happened at the White House, this state-like dinner that happened at the White House all the way back on Monday, continues to ripple forth. We're going to talk about that and pose the question to you all. Should evangelicals be moving closer and closer to Trump, an individual that seems as though some of his values and his actions are incongruent with the biblical narrative? But nevertheless, we're going to have to take a break. But when we come back, we're going to start taking your phone calls, 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can hop on over to facebook.com/pointofviewradio and share there. We'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Thursday, August 30th, 2018 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you decided to join us, or for those of you who decided to stick with us after 3 hours. We're making our way into hour 3 right now, and so grateful that you're here with us. We've had quite a show over the past 2 hours. To recap, we talked a little bit about what's happening relative to the ongoing scandal in the Catholic Church. In particular, what we're continuing to see is that individuals and entities, we're seeing more and more cover up, but as we know as believers, specifically from Luke 8:17, all that the light will reveal everything that was hidden in the dark, and tragically much has been hidden in the dark relative to the evil of the acts that were perpetuated by certain priests, but also the cover up of certain high-ranking officials, even stretching all the way up to the Vatican, according to some sources, specifically LiveSite News, and their exclusive yesterday that Pope Francis provided an apartment for an individual that was, I guess, less than desirable, and then he performed some less than desirable acts in that apartment. You can find out more information on that article on our website, pointofview.net. Click on the link, and then you'll see the briefing, which is kind of my email newsletter. During the second hour, we talked with Christopher Hutchinson. Christopher Hutchinson just came out with a new book called Rediscovering Humility, and just a fascinating interview about the elusive nature of humility, but also the need for it and the significance of it in the church, and how it might be inculcated more into the spirit. But then now we're going to transition in the third hour. For those of you that were listening yesterday, which apparently many of you made your opinions very well aware of us, that you were listening in and you had an expression or an opinion you wanted to share relative to President Trump and the evangelical meeting that happened earlier in the week on Monday, specifically a dinner that we were talking about. And so we're going to be opening up the phone lines to talk about that a little bit more as well, if you think that's a positive thing or you think that's a negative thing. So just to give you a recap of what happened on Monday, President Trump and his team opened up the White House for what was described as a state-like dinner. In this state-like dinner, they invited upwards of 100 evangelical leaders to the White House to host this event. As one participant explained, according to the RNS, for all the good work that they do, there was a sense that there was an appreciation that was shared by the Trump administration for all the work that evangelicals had done. But then on the flip side, there was also individuals and an opportunity for evangelical leaders to be able to speak out on certain everything from sex trafficking to criminal justice reform to prison reform to religious liberty issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then towards the end, what some in the evangelical community are expressing dissatisfaction with was with a particular gift that was given in particular. And so it was a gift in the form of a Bible that was presented to President Trump. And in this Bible, it was etched with an inscription that read, quote, "We appreciate the price that you have paid to walk in the high calling. History will record the greatness that you have brought for generations." And there have been many that have expressed their dissatisfaction and antagonistic spirit towards evangelicals going to the White House. with such a controversial president. And there are others that believe that there's nothing wrong with evangelicals lifting up their voices, because after all, according to what the writer of Proverbs says in Proverbs 31, that we are to give voice to the voiceless, to be able to be salt, be light in this world, that they were simply just operating out of their calling and out of the calling that God had given to them, and they were just simply lifting up their voice at the highest levels of office here in the land, and they saw nothing wrong with it, despite the fact that perhaps President Trump's character is less than desirable and incongruent with the biblical narrative. And we opened up the phone lines to you for you to be able to talk. What did you think in particular? Do you think this is a positive thing relative to evangelicals getting an opportunity and a forum to be able to express their beliefs with this president? Or do you think that this is a negative thing, that much like athletes that are no longer going to the White House to be associated with our president, do you think evangelicals should take this particular bent? And we're going to be opening up the phone lines to you. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can hop on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You'll unfortunately see my face being broadcast live on the Facebook page. And then right underneath that, you should be able to leave a comment or question. And what you share online, we'll share over air as well if we have the time. But nevertheless, we're going to be taking some of your phone calls. Do you think it's positive for evangelicals to be associating with President Trump, or do you think that that is a negative thing? So we're going to jump on over to Ricardo in Georgia right now. Ricardo, are you there?
Good afternoon, and God bless you, Nick. I am here.
Hey, Ricardo, what is your point of view?
I just have a real quick comment, and my point of view is that as far as evangelical or Christians in any capacity, if you have the opportunity to go before the President of the United States or attend a banquet or anything that has any type of influence, that as an evangelical or as a Christian, if God has given you the opportunity to be in their presence, that you should go, because your presence, you don't know, will bring about a positive difference. And my perfect example and my favorite is Esther, who says, if I perish, let me perish, for I'm going to see the king. We are not to be sitting in a shadow or sitting in a hole or hiding in our home or venting our frustration through social media. If you're given an opportunity to be in the presence of the king, you don't know, you might be that one. And even that Bible that was gifted unto him, that might be the thing that changed. Now, you may not see it with your natural eyes, but we as Christians walk by faith and not by sight. We don't know if he took that gift and went to his room and cried. We have no idea, but the heart of the king is in the Lord's hand to turn at will. So it's always positive when you're given an opportunity to be in front of a leader, whether they're Christian or not. Your presence make a difference, and God said we are our brother's keeper, and he uses us in different ways. His ways is not our ways, neither is his thoughts our thoughts, and he used the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. So just attending a banquet and giving somebody a Bible, you have no idea what God has done to that heart.
Yeah, I think that you've got some really great points on that, Ricardo. Thank you so much for your phone call. I think that's one of the interesting things is we have to be able to distinguish and differentiate between what happens in public and what happens in private. I think one of the biggest critiques that evangelicals have experienced right now is the fact that they're cozying up to him in public, but that's assuming that they're not offering up those harsh words in private or criticisms in private. And so I think it's going to be really interesting. But also, it's important for us to recognize that what you say in public, as well as your appearances in public, hold a significant amount of weight too. I'm mindful of what it says in 1 Corinthians 5, of the idea of not associating with certain individuals that Paul is going to admonish the followers in Corinth of. And so it's very interesting. So we're going to continue opening up the phone lines. I'm going to interact with some of you all too, just because, and I'm just going to be honest. I'm going to take whatever position you don't take. And so I just want to have a conversation, and hopefully we can demonstrate some civility towards one another and just go back and forth with this, because I think this is one of those issues that many people are talking about right now, but not doing so in a healthy manner nor in a civil manner. So you call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We've got to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking more about President Trump and evangelicals, specifically trying to talk through the question, should evangelicals be getting close with President Trump? We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In a recent commentary, I mentioned that many radio listeners object to the fact that Social Security is considered an entitlement. After all, they argue, they paid into Social Security and Medicare. Now they are receiving a partial refund of money they paid into the system. And while that is true for some people, it is not true for many others. Let's look at the numbers. A credible analysis was done a few years ago by the Urban Institute. Their researchers figured out what people turning 65 in various years have already paid into the system. And then they calculated what they can expect to take out after they reach age 65. And of course, the actual numbers will vary based upon family income, marital status, and longevity. In most cases, retiring Americans will receive much more from Social Security and Medicare than they put into the system. Whenever I mention this on radio, callers are shocked to hear that and often don't believe it. Here's some of the numbers from the Urban Institute. A two-earner couple receiving an average wage would have paid $722,000 into Social Security and Medicare. They could be expected to take out $966,000 in benefits. In other words, they would be paid about one-third more in benefits than they paid in taxes. A one-income earner couple earning an average wage will pay about $361,000 into Social Security and Medicare and receive about $840,000 in benefits. That's almost 2.5 times more in benefits than they paid in taxes. The conclusion is clear. In most cases, Americans who retire will receive more from Social Security and Medicare combined than they put into the system. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this Thursday, August 30th, 2018 day, we have been talking about President Trump, and specifically, should evangelicals be getting closer to him? All of this originated with the event that happened at the White House on Monday night, where the evangelical leaders, upwards of 100, were issued an invitation to join the president at the White House, president and some of his administration, in order that they might be, one, appreciated, but two, be able to offer up insight relative to what's happening in our news, in the news, and what they can be doing. And so it's just been very interesting, some of the reactions that have been happening. One, there are some individuals that are saying that evangelicals should go the way of athletes and not accept the invitation to the White House. And then others are saying quite the opposite. When given the invitation, you're respecting the high holder of the office, and it's an opportunity for Christians to be a bright light and in that place, an opportunity for them to kind of pour out the salt in such a way that they might be able to advocate and be a voice for the voiceless during those times. And so we've been taking some of your phone calls. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We're going to jump on over to New Mexico right now. We've got Linda on the line. Linda, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Linda, what is your point of view?
Well, I think if the president offers an invitation to anyone, it's honorable for us to accept that. I also believe that President Trump is doing a great job and that he needs the prayer support of the Christian people. We need to stand behind him. We need to pray for him, pray that God would give him and his staff wisdom as we would any other president. The one thing I appreciate about him is that he is a businessman. He's not a politician. That means a lot of their jobs they're going to be liable at losing their jobs having him in office, because he's going to make a business decision, which I feel like is very important for our country at this time.
That's a great point. Well, Linda, thank you so much. Linda, really, you accentuated the fact that what I think countless Americans for the past 200 years have seen is that there's just a great honor in being offered an invitation to the people's house. And there have been, it's only been recently, really, that we've started to hear at least more individuals that have turned down some of those invitations. And so we're going to continue talking a little bit about this. Let's jump on over to George right now. George in South Carolina. George, are you there?
I'm here.
Hey, George, what's your point of view?
My point of view is that it was great that the evangelicals accepted the invitation. It was even greater that they offered him the inscription in the Bible that they did that was read over the air. I thought that was wonderful, because we never know how the Holy Spirit's going to convict anyone. And as you mentioned, the presidency is the highest office in the United States. But we, as ambassadors to Christ, are representatives of even the highest office of the universe. How can we reject any offer from anyone in the world of a political power to attend? We are robbing them of God's presence in us to be demonstrated to them. And I say, as much as the atheists and everything that try to take the ban of "In God We Trust" out of our monetary system and printed dollars, okay, which was turned down, praise God for it, that we who are evangelicals need not be timid with our faith and have to duplicate the exuberance and the zeal that the atheists and the other ones are trying to force their views. The constitutionality guarantees freedom of religion for both sides. It doesn't mean that the evangelicals and the Christians should cow down to them. Okay, we need to rise up and be equal with them, and then let the Holy Spirit convict them that they're wrong. And if I may also transgress a little bit on the fact that I've discovered something having to do with Matthew 21:22, that where Jesus says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's," and the Holy Spirit has gone into a very several-year dialogue with me and kept asking, "Well, what belongs to Caesar?" I'm like, "Wow, that's a good question." So I started to research from the tax basis what belongs to Caesar, and I've taken this stance, which is from the statutes of Title 26 of the United States Code, which cannot be argued by any silver-tongued attorney in the United States, okay, because statutes are not arguable. They are the law. And I want to share with everyone that Section 3402, paragraph P as in Papa, stipulates that any time withholding from our payroll tax needs to occur is when that source is from a federal source of payment. Well, most of us work for private enterprise. That's excluded from the law. So there's no mandatory requirement for withholding, but people are asking, so why are we paying income tax? I hate to say this, but I blame myself for this too, having been in the dark, and we are bearing false witness against ourselves. When we join a job or a company, we sign a W-4. That W-4 is a written contract between we, the employee, the employer, and the IRS. And we, as the employee, are agreeing to withholding. But the law, Section 3402, specifically states that requirement is only to occur when a federal source of payment is made.
That's fascinating, George. Thank you so much. I mean, you did bring up a really good point that we do have an opportunity to be able to render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and render to God's the things that are God's. It's the reality that we have been impressed, like Caesar's coin has the impression of the king or of the leader on that, and so we are to give them a portion of that. But also we have the image of God that has been rendered upon our face, and so we don't just give a portion of our offering to God, we give our entire being. Of what Paul would say in Romans 12, we give our entire lives. We offer up our lives as a living sacrifice. And so wanting to be bearers of truth. which is it's a good point. Let's jump on over. I think Steve in North Carolina right now is going to have something interesting. Steve, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Steve, what's your point of view?
I'm just curious, and we're to pray for any leader that's above us as a group and as a church and as the body of Christ. But where were the liberals and the Democrats uproar when Obama hosted the state dinner at taxpayers' expense for all the Muslim leaders from the Middle East?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have a state dinner for the Christian leaders here in the United States. It was the Muslim leaders from overseas. Where was their uproar?
Yeah, I think the argument would be for that in particular was it's more diplomatic in nature. And so if you look at some of the comments that President Trump made at the White House on Monday, would be kind of referencing the 2018 election, but also like what are some of the policies that they could be implementing. So I know there's some that have been critiquing the event on Monday as being more campaign oriented, so using taxpayer dollars for a campaign event. But I think that's a misconstruing what the reality of Monday was, which was Monday just being able to try to solicit feedback how they might be able to better serve a particular constituency. But I think you do bring up a good point. But I would say that's probably more diplomatic in nature.
What was the U.S. to gain out of that? I mean, what benefit was it to the U.S. and to our government? I mean, the leaders, the Christian leaders that Trump brought in, they were there to admonish the president, to guide him on issues for the country and for the betterment of the country.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I would just say that when President Obama, I think you're referencing I think it was 2015 or 2013, the iftar dinner that President Obama hosted at the White House. I'm not sure about the composition of the crowd. I know that obviously there's going to be more of a Muslim bent for a high holy day within the Islamic calendar. But I would say that if it's more international, I would imagine it's just diplomatic kind of. Being completely honest, like that's one of the core beliefs of conservatism is the exceptional nature of the United States, not simply because of just the natural resources that we have, but just the potential or the prominence that we offer up on the world stage. Like we're leaders of the free world, and that we have a capacity, and some would even say a commitment to be able to make sure that there's, to a certain degree, that we're making sure that there's prosperity that abounds within the world. Obviously, with President Trump, there's going to put America first, and there's the centrality of America. But recognizing in this globalized world that we need to be not necessarily world police, but what happens over there often, because in this interconnected world, will ripple back over here as well.
I got you. He told me to mention to you about Tennessee. What part of Tennessee are you from?
I was born in Knoxville. Well, are you close? Do you have connections to Tennessee?
My daughter's over in Rock Island.
Over in Chattanooga town. Okay.
Just out of, she's about Middle Tennessee, just out of McMinnville.
Oh, yes, sir. I know McMinnville really well. I know the Collins family out there. But, well, Steve, thank you so much for that. And go Rocky Top. I think we can all agree. We can all agree on that. But nevertheless, Steve, thank you so much. We're going to continue talking about President Trump, specifically with evangelicals. Should he be cozying up to them, or should evangelicals be separating from him? We'll take your phone calls, 800-351-1212, and we'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Thursday, August 30th day, 2018, we have been talking about President Trump and specifically his relationship with evangelicals. It kind of led to a Twitter uproar, and no word on if actually what happens on Twitter reflects reality, but many are commenting on President Trump's inviting of evangelicals, and many are offering their criticisms of evangelicals for going to the White House on Monday night for a state-like dinner. Some have been saying that they should not be associating with President Trump, much like the basketball players, football players, et cetera, et cetera. Many sports athletes, they're commenting that they should not be associating with President Trump personally, or maybe because of past indiscretions, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's also some individuals that are saying that they should continue to draw close to President Trump. They think that there's an opportunity to lift their voice and to advocate for their issues, whether it's religious liberty, prison reform, criminal justice reform, human trafficking, et cetera, that recognizing he is the president, he is the individual that is in charge, and why not if an opportunity has been given. And so we have been taking some of your phone calls, and we're going to go back and forth because, as Montaigne said, there's nothing more boring than a conversation in which everybody agrees. So I'm going to go back and forth with some people. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Let's jump on over to Texas right now. We've got Bob in Texas. Are you there, Bob?
I'm here.
Hey, Bob. Whereabouts in Texas are you?
I'm down in Tyler.
Okay, Tyler, Texas. A couple hours to the east of us here in Dallas. What's your point of view, Bob?
Well, first of all, I told Jim, I'm thankful to the Lord that we finally had somebody that listened to us in the White House. We didn't enjoy that for the last 8 years, and of course, if you look at the records, you know that it was Christians that primarily got him elected, and he's listened, but also. Regarding, and everybody has the right to state their own opinion. I criticize no one for that. And that includes, of course, all brothers and sisters. But I always am careful about making judgments on folks until I kind of check my own eye and make sure there's not a brick or a log in there. You know what I mean?
Oh, yes, sir.
And so that's kind of the way I look at it. But also, I certainly agree with the gentleman that called in. I believe his name was Ricardo. Mm-hmm. And I think that was his name. Made some good points. And Linda from New Mexico. And and plus the fact that we're to be witnesses. It doesn't say it cannot be to the President of the United States. So, and to me, these brothers and sisters that were there, up there were witnesses to everyone that was there. Mm-hmm. So that's my point of view.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Bob. Really do appreciate it. I think that's one of the things that we're continuing to hear is just that there's really not any reticence. This isn't necessarily an active endorsement of the president. It's simply just taking him up on his offer of the invitation to be able to advocate at this particular level. I think that would be interesting, though. I think a common critique has often been that the previous administration did not offer up this kind of invitation to evangelicals in particular. But I think we need to be. I think an argument can be made that he did offer up an invitation, but it wasn't necessarily just exclusively to evangelicals. What this president has done I don't want to say exclusively, he has honed in and concentrated his religious outreach to evangelical leaders. Specifically, that's who we continue to see. President Obama was much more, there was a multi-faith component to what President Obama did. So there was individuals that were evangelical, there were mainline in house. So I want to answer to that. But I will say this, out to evangelicals, because of past indiscretion, ability to create divisiveness is, let's jump.
Yes.
Hey.
Well, I think it's a given that evangelicals should have a desire to meet with the president. We, of course, we stand behind the office, regardless of how we feel about the particular person in the office. However, concerning past discretions or the alleged past discretions, we should believe that a person is innocent until proven guilty. And we hear all of this negative rhetoric about our president, but none of it is proven to a point. And if you think about Abraham Lincoln probably was one of the most criticized presidents of our nation's history. But yet, how does history look at that president? I believe that our current president will survive the rhetoric of a minority opinion, especially of his opponents, because the majority of Americans stand behind our president. I'm 50 years old, and in my lifetime, the two best presidents that I believe we've had were Ronald Reagan and, of course, President Trump. I believe evangelicals should take advantage of the opportunity that God's provided. Our current president has done so many things that are good, but yet the negative rhetoric seems to be, at the forefront. And look what he's done concerning the nation of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
He stood behind the nation of Israel, and because of that, there's an unalterable promise that God is going to bless him as an individual. God's going to bless his office and his term, his administration, because he stood with the nation of Israel. God said, "I'll bless them that bless thee," and our president is no exception. God's blessings will be on this man. So we need to pray for him. We need to keep the dialogue open. I believe it's a minority of professional athletes that would not have an audience with the president. I believe there's many professional athletes that would desire to have an audience with the president, and I believe many of them support him.
Mm. Well, Tim, let me go back, because I completely agree with you on a lot of points. I should say, one, I think the results speak for themselves. I think we can all say the economy is white hot right now. I mean, the markets are doing phenomenal right now. Consumer confidence skyrocketing. Job market. There's more people there is more openings than there are actually people that are looking for jobs. ISIS, easily. They've been diminished in Syria. They've been diminished in Afghanistan. They've been diminished in Iran, or not Iran, but in Iraq. It's very clear, foreign policy wise, market wise, and even tax reform that was passed. I mean, it's very clear that he has got some stellar results right now. And then we haven't even mentioned religious liberty, which is a really big piece. But do you think that his rhetoric on Twitter specifically, and just some of the name calling, do you think that's incongruent with the Christian ethic?
Well, a lot of the things that we hear about his tweets, some of them are verifiable, some of them are hearsay. I think a lot of that is his background, is where he comes from, right or wrong. I'm not excusing, inappropriate tweets. He just happens to be a person, who speaks what's on his mind. Sometimes maybe that's offensive to some people. As a matter of fact, it hasn't crossed the line, I don't believe, as far as it being a factor of him being able to carry out the office and do an effective job. We don't see any evidence whatsoever that he's racist in any way. We keep hearing the rhetoric that he's racist. I can't find any evidence whatsoever of a racist act by our current president. I just can't find it.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for calling in. It's been really illuminating, very much so. We're going to continue taking some phone calls right now. We've got Mike in South Carolina. Mike, are you there?
Yes, sir. I appreciate all y'all doing. I enjoy your show. I think the evangelicals need President Trump. The left was moving to the point where Christian beliefs were being seen as hate speech and trying to be suppressed. So I think, we do need a president that stands up for Christian values. And he has publicly got up and said, we serve a powerful God, So, nobody's perfect, but I think that we need to take every opportunity to invite people or to share the word.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That was it.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much, Mike. We got to take a commercial break. I wanted to make sure that Mike got a chance in, but we're going to continue talking. I think Mike, Tim, I think a couple of others have been bringing up a really good point. I would really appreciate someone that would call in for making an argument that evangelicals should not cozy up, should not accept the invitation to the White House. We'll be entertaining both sides of the conversation relative to the debate that we're having right now. But you can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. We'd love to hear a Christian out there that thinks that evangelicals should not be accepting invitations to the White House, and then a good rationale why. Because I've got a couple of questions that I'd want to ask. But we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. At the heart of religious liberty is the right to follow the faith of our choice. That means that no one, not even the United States Air Force, may force someone to follow any particular faith. But when Jeff Montanari converted to Orthodox Judaism, the Air Force treated him poorly. They rejected his application to be a Jewish chaplain, something the Air Force has a great need for at the present time. His superior officers were hostile towards him, excluding him from activities in order to drive him from the Air Force. He even received a litany of questions that questioned the sincerity of his conversion to Judaism. First Liberty sent a demand letter to the Air Force explaining that their job is to win wars, not question the legitimacy of someone's conversion. We believe the actions of a few Air Force officials to be unlawful discrimination. As the U.S. Supreme Court put it in Hobby v. Unemployment Appeals Commission of Florida, the First Amendment protects the free exercise rights of employees who convert from one faith to another after they are hired. In other words, religious liberty protects against discrimination even when you change your religion. Chaplain Montanari just wants to continue serving his country in accordance with his religious beliefs. We are confident that the Air Force can easily solve this problem and stand ready to assist in that process. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this August 30th, 2018 day, we've been talking a little bit about President Trump and evangelical support of him, all stemming back to the, specifically the current news cycle is having a lot of people pay attention right now to what happened on Monday night relative to evangelicals accepting the invitation to a state-like dinner at the White House, and upwards of 100 evangelical leaders accepted that invitation and went to the White House to be able to, one, for President Trump just to be able to thank them for their support, and two, for them to be able to go back and forth on their particular policy agendas and advocate for their positions. And so there have been some on one side of the aisle that have said that evangelicals should not be associating with President Trump. They believe some of his past rhetoric and some of his past actions have been incongruent with the biblical narrative, and thus they need to separate themselves. And then there have been others that say this is simply an invitation, and much like Billy Graham, we're going to associate with individuals on both sides of the aisle. And when we have a president that is receptive to the claims of evangelicals and some of the causes of evangelicals, we would be bad stewards to not take up that offer. And so we've been taking your phone calls back and forth. And in a shocking twist, the excitement from yesterday when we talked about this has spilled over to today. So if you're getting a busy line, that's simply because there's just a couple of you that have an opinion on this. And we're going to go back and forth. And so I'm going to be a guy. I'm going to be neutral, but I'm going to be the devil's advocate when we take your phone call. So be ready. So we're going to jump on over to South Carolina right now. We've got Philip in South Carolina. Are you there, Philip?
Yes, I am. How are you?
I'm doing well. We got to ask one question before that. This is just a one-word answer. Are you a Clemson or South Carolina man?
Clemson.
Okay. What is your point of view about President Trump and evangelicals now that we know that you're a Clemson man?
First I need to acknowledge that President Trump has been an extremely stalwart, advocate for evangelical principles and things that evangelicals care about. But I want to really just advise a word of caution in associating themselves too closely, because I'm very concerned that in the future, when people reflect upon actually what kind of president he was, how he conducted his affairs, how he conducted his business, it's not going to look very good. I personally don't think he should be supported by evangelicals, because I really don't think that he upholds Christian values. I think his values are basically whatever serves him in the moment.
So would you be kind of willing to extrapolate that and say that Christians from now on should not associate themselves with individuals in politics that do not, I guess I'm trying to figure out what is it in particular that is causing you to say, well, no, because I'm thinking about another individual. So should Christians have associated with President Bill Clinton? Because it seemed as though he had some actions that were incongruent with biblical narrative.
No, absolutely. Bill Clinton made just an egregious mistake and was abusive and completely wrong in his actions. Now, of course, Christianity is all about redemption.
Yeah.
And understood, and that's a fundamental tenet of Christianity. I think if you would go to Bill Clinton at this moment, he would express genuine remorse and regret of how that tainted his marriage, his presidency, and the image of America in the world. I do not think that if you go to President Trump at the moment, he would apologize for anything or feel that he is doing anything wrong.
Yeah, I think that's.
I think that excuse me, he would not be repentant, remorseful, or even reflective for one nanosecond. I think that he will run roughshod over any principle, any person, or any set of beliefs if it seems to serve his immediate interest.
Yeah, I think that I would agree with that simply because of his past statement saying he's never he's never asked for forgiveness. So I think that's pretty clear. So Philip, am I hearing you say that Christians in the public square, evangelicals, should only associate and should only try to advocate with individuals that are Christians?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I would simply say that as Christians, we should really look at the heart of someone.
Yeah.
And President Obama, for instance, made mistakes. He did things I did not agree with, quite a few. But at the heart of it all, he, I believe, was a good man who honestly was trying to do the right thing. He was a good dad, good husband, and did the best he could for the American people. I think Mr. Trump is doing what's good for Mr. Trump. And looking back a few short years from now, I don't think it's going to look pretty. And I don't think people that were gung-ho advocates of Mr. Trump are going to come out of this looking very well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting. Philip, I'm so grateful that you've gone back and forth. Thank you so much. I share with you a great interest as to how this is all going to play out as history records it. Not necessarily immediate history, like within 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, however much, but 40 years from now, as we start getting more of the paperwork, starting to see more of it, how history will record this. And so I think it will be very interesting. Let's jump on over to Georgia right now. We've got Jenny in Georgia. Jeanine?
Yes.
Jeannie. Okay, Jeannie, what's your point of view?
Okay, I appreciate you taking my call. A couple things that I had to ask you. One is you mentioned these athletes that declined going to the White House.
Yes, ma'am.
And most of these people, from my understanding, is they're very anti-American. Is that what you have seen?
I wouldn't say that they're anti-American. I think kind of the characterization has been if they kneel, they're disrespecting the flag and they're unpatriotic. But I don't know if they're un-American. I would just say that they're exercising their First Amendment rights.
But isn't unpatriotic the same thing as being un-American?
I don't
see a difference.
I think there would be. I think they're exercising their First Amendment rights. Personally, I'm very offended by what they're doing, just because my grandfather fought in the Korean War, earned a Purple Heart, and so I'm not. He can't stand anymore, and so I very much want to stand for him, because that's the least I can do because of everything that he's done for me and the countless other veterans that we have. I find it to be disrespectful, but I don't want to force anyone to say anything. Similar to how I don't want anybody to burn a flag, but I don't think we should outlaw burning flags, though, because of the First Amendment.
And the other thing, I have a couple other questions, if that's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. How many other presidents have invited evangelicals to speak with them and get their point of view?
Yeah, I can't give you a specific number, but I can go all the way back. I would say you can go all the way back to Jimmy Carter, when kind of the evangelical born again. Each one of the presidents has kind of opened up the White House to evangelical leaders.
Well, what about the current ones, Obama and Clinton?
Yeah, President Obama opened it up to evangelicals. I mean, you have Joel Hunter down in Orlando. You had Russell Moore that was able to have entree with President Obama. So, and then President Bush obviously had great ties with some evangelical leaders. I mean, he even credits Billy Graham for his conversion experience.
The other thing is, as far as I wanted to understand what your current position is, because do you believe that words have meanings and that specifically there's connotations to them?
Yes, ma'am. I believe words very much have meaning.
Okay. When you say cozying up to Trump, does that give a positive image of Trump or a negative one?
Oh, I'm not using it in a positive or negative sense. I think that's the reason why I wanted to go back and forth with you. I am so sorry, Jeannie, but we've actually got to get going. But thank you so much for your phone call. Your questions were great. I greatly appreciate it, and the civility that we could have back and forth with one with another. And we're so grateful that you decided to call in, and so grateful that many of you decided to listen. But we've got to be back. But we'll be back tomorrow with the weekend roundup, and so we'll see you then.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.